This week, Dan Andrews quits. Independent commentator Matt Wong from Discernable joins me from Melbourne to discuss Andrews' disastrous legacy. Kamahl gives the woke kids at the project a lesson in math and manners, although we think the real number is more than 50 billion, not 40 billion. We'll explain why. And the hypocrisy of 60 Minutes on full display with the show's latest hatchet job on Russell Brand. It has not been a good week for the old establishment media. Join us as we give them a good roasting. G'day Newcastle, g'day Fremantle, g'day Australia, and welcome to episode 225 of The Other Side Australia for the weekend commencing Friday, September 29, 2023. I'm Damien Curry. Well, the man who is internationally notorious for his heavy-handed authoritarian approach to managing the COVID pandemic, locking down his people for 262 days using questionable legal means, running roughshod over decades of convention on limits to government power in Australia, using the police as a brutal enforcement squad, arresting people for political social media posts, while himself running a massively well-orchestrated PR campaign based on fear with a huge PR budget and team, the one and only, thank God, Daniel Andrews, has resigned from public life, hopefully never to return to it in any way, shape or form, either directly or indirectly, ever again. Honestly, if he shows up alongside Jacinda Ardern in some WEF or UN role, I'm going to lose it. He's brought the country into global disrepute, the state of Victoria into national disrepute, and the Labor Party to an all-time low as an institution. In case you've forgotten what he did amid all the praise for his fine leadership from sycophants following his resignation this week, here is a recap on Dan Andrews' Victoria, put together by our colleagues here at ADH TV this week.
Let's start tonight with one of the grand imposters, Daniel Andrews.
Grounds, basketball courts, skate parks and exercise equipment, despite the fact that it's outdoors, will be closed.
You're arresting someone for no reason.
Sunday I think is going to be quite a nice day. Yep, at home. At home. Otherwise, there'll be lots of Sundays spent in hospital.
Oh!
Seriously? One more comment about human rights, honestly.
For what? For a mask? For what? For not having a mask?
Protests are not smart, they're not safe, and they're not lawful.
To a lockdown protest you put on for Saturday.
Anyone making a selfish choice that they can protest, you can't. It's not appropriate, it's not lawful. Look, I don't know if I can be any clearer than that. And Victoria Police will be pretty clear as well. We've got a job to do and they will do it.
Okay, they're shooting. They're now shooting. They're now shooting people. Oh my God.
A bunch of people down the Ryback Beach last night who thought the best thing to do is to go and watch the sunset. I'm sure it was a beautiful sunset. But that's not in the spirit or in the letter of these rules.
The bloke is a fraud. You cannot now believe anything Andrews says.
Virus doesn't discriminate. We're not discriminating. And we're going to lock out people who are not vaccinated.
I had CPR for 35 minutes, got shocked 7 times, and then the next thing I know, I'm waking up in hospital on Saturday.
There's people that don't want this mandatory vaccine. How do we manage this?
Well, then they won't be going to work.
Wayne is one of thousands of people who have suffered adverse reactions to the vaccines and have been left behind by their state and federal governments.
If you're making the choice not to get vaccinated, it's not a choice to get vaccinated, then you're making the wrong choice.
We have said no, you must get vaccinated.
Mandates are here. We didn't get to 93% without mandates.
Somebody has to be held accountable for the number of people that have had these adverse reactions and passed away.
There's a body of work there, and I'm very proud of that.
Victorians who elected him must now face up to the fact that the debt he will leave will be for others to deal with.
And now it's for somebody else to continue that work.
Andrews will take his superannuation and ride off into the world of oblivion.
Today I will again visit Government House and resign as Premier and member for Mulgrave, effective 5 p.m. tomorrow.
How will this bloke be remembered?
We won't forget what you did to us last year. We're not for sale. That is taxpayers' money. It's not your money. You're a disgrace.
Well, how are imposters remembered? They're despised.
It's hard to watch, isn't it? It's quite extraordinary to think that we were arresting pregnant women in her own home. That one still gets me. I will never get over that for as long as I live. And the fact that we also had that footage of the woman being dragged out of her car by a police officer like that, the insanity that Victoria descended into. And I just can't understand how anyone, Liberal or Labor, could defend this man's premiership and his actions. The man who desperately wants to be the next Premier of Queensland, little Stephen Miles, is hoping no doubt that Andrew's move will give Anastasia Palaszczuk, the third and final of the Labor COVID premiers, a little nudge along. He tweeted this week, Daniel Andrews MP is a leader with true Labor values. Today he announced his resignation as Premier of Victoria. Thanks for everything, Dan. I'm sorry, true Labor values. When did authoritarian disregard for human rights? Oh, if I hear someone mention human rights again, I'll just go crazy. Yeah, who cares about human rights and civil liberties? Doesn't matter. Disregard for human rights, complete disregard, and civil liberties. How did that make its way into Australian Labor Party values? They're authoritarian Communist Party values. When I grew up in the Sir Joe era in Queensland in the 1980s, the Labor Party stood up against any repression or reduction in our civil liberties or human rights. Now the Labor Party applauds a man who ran roughshod over those things. Stephen Miles is not the guy to be the next Queensland Premier, if that's how he thinks. The Prime Minister was also gushing over his little authoritarian friend, tweeting this lovely happy snap with the words, Daniel Andrews is a person of deep conviction, great compassion and fierce determination, and he brought all those qualities to his time as Premier of Victoria. It was a great pleasure for me to work alongside an old friend and to sit at the National Cabinet table with someone who believed so deeply in the power of government to change lives for the better. He locked the people of Victoria up for 262 days in one of the longest lockdowns in the world during a pandemic that only really seriously affected people over 60, and we knew it almost right from the start. He wrecked the entire place like a bull in a china shop just to save one piece of crockery. It was the worst crisis management in the history of crisis management, with all the artful technique and subtlety that a thrash metal guitarist would bring to a symphony orchestra. And the state debt. Let's not even talk about the debt. Or maybe we should. Now, for the people who think that debt doesn't matter, I respectfully remind you that the health of the economy is directly connected to people's lives, people's health and their well-being. The state debt is at more than $130 billion, on its way to $170 billion by 2027. How much is that? Well, it's more than New South Wales debt and Queensland debt combined. In fact, you can throw in Tasmania's debt too. That is not a good manager by any measure. Let's chat to a man now who has lived through and reported on and battled against the Dan Andrews regime since the first days of COVID. My very good friend from Discernable Media in Melbourne, the original producers of The Other Side back in 2021, Matthew Wong. Matt, thank you for your time.
Pleasure to be here. Lived through it, but did I survive? As they say, this lifestyle has a pulse, but does it have a soul?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've escaped to the countryside, I understand. You're now living in the life.
Anything to get as far away from that man as possible. It's a pleasure to be back here. That's stunning what you've said about Dan Andrews. Just a horrible sort of a guy. But I guess what we're going to talk about is the fact that so many people here love him.
Yes. Why is that? What is the phenomenon? I mean, we hear, in the alternative media and in the independent media, lots of people condemning him as if he's universally condemned. That is far from the truth. There are many people out there praising the guy.
Okay,
Why?
so start broadly with the election results. So we know that they got a primary vote in the 30s, mid-30s. The Liberal got slightly lower, again around the low to mid-30s. The reality of Victoria is the voting public is mostly disengaged. This is what you have to remember. You can't think of it like the US, where you have a strong the Young Turks on one side and Ben Shapiro on the other. That's not Australia. That's not Victoria. Victoria is mostly let me get along with my life and leave me alone. And that Dan Andrews guy, he's okay. Like, he removed some of those train crossings. That's pretty cool. And for many people, and sadly most, that's as deep as it extends. So that explains what you're seeing. You're seeing what you mentioned, some of the new media saying he's evil, he's terrible. And then some of the establishment, Alan Jones has been saying, which I think they're correct. Peter Credlin has been saying, Terry McCrann has been saying, you've been saying this is terrible, the debt. Yes, but I'm sad to report that you're sadly in the minority and speaking to a minority.
I think it's probably reflected, we shouldn't be picking on Victoria here, Matt, too much, I think, because that's something that probably is a phenomenon to a large degree around the whole country. What Dan Andrews has done is he's kind of gotten away with it. He's pushed the envelope on a lot of things that people don't understand, right? The subtleties and nuances of those laws that he manipulated to enable that lockdown, which you covered so in such detail throughout 2020 and 2021, but the mainstream media certainly couldn't cover in detail because they don't have the bandwidth for it, or perhaps the intellect for it, I might say. And we saw a capitulation of the media. I mean, he controlled the media incredibly well, didn't he?
Mm. Well, so people don't give Dan Andrews enough credit in the sense that I think the relationship is best described as an abusive relationship, and we can go into that if you like. But the point is, he's an abuser is very good at being manipulative. And I think people talk about Stockholm syndrome or Melbourne syndrome. I think that's a real thing, because if you consider during the lockdowns, he kept on telling us that it was health advice. It's not me. It's just the health advice. It was only this year in 2023 in March that the media finally reported that Kudos, that research firm owned by John Armitage, was actually doing very deep research on people's attitudes towards the lockdowns to inform Daniel Andrews on whether to loosen lockdowns or not. Now, we had a suspicion this was happening because the way the lockdowns were loosened seemed to be guided not by case numbers, certainly, and not by any kind of health advice or science. It seemed to be guided by whether people were complying or not. So typically what you'd see in Melbourne, especially, but across Victoria, is compliance would start to wane as we had perhaps the world's longest lockdown. Some people say Brazil had worse, but people started to not comply. Daniel got a bit antsy and said, you shouldn't be having a drink on the sidewalk and removing your mask, and you shouldn't be watching the sunset at Ryback Beach. And then suddenly,
the little rousing schoolmaster came out. It was a bit like Anastasia Palaszczuk, or Mark McGowan waving the finger as the authoritarian left love to do when they show their true colours, right? How dare you disobey me?
Yes, but then what we saw was suddenly that following sort of half a week later, restrictions were magically eased because they need to avoid embarrassment. And I get that. And so what I think we're missing in all of this is understanding just how good Daniel Andrews was at being Teflon Dan and convincing people that he was only doing this for their own safety. And they bought it. They swallowed it.
Yeah. Not everybody swallowed it, though. I mean, it was about 50-50, right? I mean, people bought the schmoozy kind of slick messaging. I mean, he's very good at doing that stuff.
I don't think it's 50-50, mate. I think it's 30-30, like we said, 30-40, just like the election result.
Right. So
30 hated him, 30 bought it, and then 40 were like, are we allowed to go to playgrounds today? Oh, no, that's next week. Okay, all right, I'll go next week. They just weren't that engaged.
Totally disengaged, just do whatever they're told. Get on with life in other respects. How is the feeling now, though? I mean, has it shifted much, or are people still clinging? Because it's very hard for people to, once something passes, you don't want to go back and look at it and say, gee, we were really wrong, or we really did some seriously bad things. It's easier to just say, oh, the cookers, forget about that. Let's just get on with it now. It's all over. It's all behind us. But we really can't afford to do that, because we've got to think about what would happen if it happens again, and how we learn from these pretty serious mistakes that were made the first time around.
As they say, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. So you're right. People are running away from their failures during the pandemic period. But again, I think people who are able to communicate directly to people and cut through the political spin, they're winning. So at the moment, you've got, we had a protest, if you can call it that, celebrating Daniel Andrews. There was Herald Sun says a couple hundred people. I think Rukshan Fernando said there was 1,000. But whatever the case, it's not huge. It's very minor. Most people are just wanting to get on with life and ignore some of the bad things that have happened. And unfortunately, we have to accept that reality that those people exist. And to communicate with them, you need to cut through to their everyday. So there's a real need for conservative or right of centre or traditional capitalists or this whole non-progressive movement. They need to pitch and initially win a whole new cohort rather than trying to win them back or live on the glory years of the boomers, because I'm sad to say that we're all going to die, but the boomers are going to die first. And so we want to right the country, well, then you better start figuring out how to communicate and win the hearts of Gen Z.
It's not easy. Obviously, it's very hard in the scheme of things when you've got shows like The Project. I mean, later in the show tonight, this weekend, we're going to be looking at the absolute disgrace that was The Project, the Sunday Project this week, with the very clear misrepresentation of facts over Aboriginal spending. And it's done with the sort of overlay of we're fixing the misinformation, we're fixing the disinformation. In actual fact, they're perpetuating it. And that show, as much as we all might sit back and scoff and say, well, it's a lefty show, it speaks to the young people, as does Q&A, as does The Drum on the ABC, as do all of these sort of talk shows these days, and social media, which is probably 90% of the media that young people consume and Gen Z consume. They're really being delivered a very specific ideology, right?
Okay, so I interviewed a member of the Victorian Socialist Party, one of their organisers, and another key person to look out for is Alison Pennington. She's from La Trobe University and has just written this book, Gen F'd. And basically these sorts of people who you might say, oh, they're socialists or whatever, they are summing up this pent-up feeling amongst the young generation that they're going to be worse off than their parents. And the world they're entering is more akin to the 1930s than it is. It's not exactly, but it's more like that than it is than the 1950s boom. And so we need to understand that there's a certain level of angst amongst Gen Z, and it's not just TikTok screwing their minds up in avocado toast and whatever. There are some legitimate concerns that the wealth is being moved back up to the older generations. And I think that's what Daniel Andrews was so good at. So he and the project is so good at. They're good at appealing to, hey, things are not quite right in the world. And everyone goes, and this is how we fix it. Here's some socialism. So I think the problem is deeper than Andrews, and he's gone now, but the problem remains, is that we have a country, and in particular this state, addicted to the concept of a fair go, and this is not right and this is not fair. And to fix it, we're going to have to pull some big ban hammers of government to make it right.
Yeah, well, we certainly did that during COVID. We did a lot of pulling of levers, and we spent a heck of a lot of money doing it. And unfortunately, the generations that are going to cop, this is the irony of the thing, right? That the generations who are going to have to cop that and wear that and pay that back are the younger generations. And I do think we did a bad thing by young Australians with the way that we managed COVID. I can't think of any other time in history where a culture has put the interests of people over 60 ahead of the interests of the young. It's almost like a moral or cultural disorder or backwards thing where we've sort of let children suffer in order to protect people over 60.
So Eric Weinstein, famous economist, and works with Peter Thiel in managing big hedge funds in the US. He says that the boomer generation is probably the most he's a boomer, is probably the most selfish generation that has ever lived on the planet, because they're selling out the future of the future generations for their own today. And so there is some truth to that, I guess, but we've got to remember that the selling out of the future that you've just mentioned has come with the applause of the younger generations. You've got to understand that the younger generations are also selling themselves out. They are approving and voting for these policies that are literally turning Australia into, I don't know what it's going to look like in 20 years. It's certainly not going to be fairer, certainly not going to be more wealthy. So yeah, they're selling themselves down the river.
Well, look, I'm Gen X and you're not. You're Gen
Millennial.
Y, right?
Millennial
still drives me
35,
crazy
yeah.
that there's that much age difference. But anyway, it's a running gag. But every generation, I suppose, blames the generation before and gripes about their parents to a certain extent. I think we give boomers a bit of a hard time, but I do think that there has been a lack of care and concern, I think, for the younger generations, and maybe we're seeing a little bit of that backlashing now, and it's being unfortunately taken advantage of by socialist forces appealing to the young sense of justice. And it's the wrong solution. It's the wrong solution for the young. I'm hoping, though, that Generation Alpha is going to switch back, that they seem to be rejecting a lot of the woke identity politics. They seem to be questioning a lot of the fairness and justice of socialism, that it's maybe not so fair that everyone gets equally rewarded for different varying degrees of effort. And questioning a lot of that. Maybe we'll see a shift back.
Well, that's hopeful. I think the only thing we can really do in dark times is to shine as bright as we can. So, for example, this whole segment is about Daniel Andrews and what's going on. The idea of him treating us like an abuser and we're being the victims is very apt. I mean, consider during the lockdowns, I think it was in that clip, he literally said to everyone, all of this can be avoided if people don't protest. I mean, it's the same as saying, I only belt you, wife. This can all be avoided if you just cooked my dinner properly, or whatever the case. Like this, if we can expose, and which is part of what your show does, how ridiculous these new cultural moments are and how bankrupt they are. Yes, we may be able to get Gen Alpha to go, holy cow, millennials lost their mind, Gen Z lost their mind. I can see this is not working, this woke movement. We need to go back to some more classical values, maybe in a new way, but classical values. We might actually win this game. So I encourage you and everyone to keep trying to expose what's dodgy. But hey, have you noticed that the right, maybe the right wing's not the right word, but the dissidents like myself, some of us can go a bit too far, and we can start to jump on every little thing Daniel Andrews does, and this has been to his benefit. Some of the accusations against Daniel that I won't even go into them. We need to be careful and accurate in the way we tear down the woke movement, and not tear down a straw man. That does not help our cause.
No, it doesn't. It actually damages it, significantly damages it. And that's part of the problem. I mean, it's often difficult in our positions, I suppose, to judge where that line is, but you've got to try to do your best at least. And I always try to just fall back on the data and the facts as much as I possibly can. But I think when you see an injustice, you've really got to push it and call it out. Matt, just in terms of the disinformation and misinformation bill that's currently before the federal parliament, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because you're talking about the importance of us being able to shine the light. If we have the left establishment, if academia, people like the RMIT Fact Lab, people like...
Who are paid. They're paid per fact check.
Of course they are. And people, in the mainstream media have a vested interest in shutting Discernable, ADH, this new independent Rukshan and Avi and everybody down. They've got a vested financial interest in that. They're going to be supportive and drive this disinformation and misinformation bill pretty hard. So are both major parties probably. How do we sort of fight that if we can't even speak? I mean, it's very hard, right?
Well, that's the point. That's the point. How do you fight if you can't speak? And people may not be aware of this bill. The most grievous part of it is that there is an exemption in the bill. If you think of the biggest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation over the past 3 years throughout the pandemic, it wasn't necessarily the Burnet Institute saying stupid stuff. It wasn't necessarily the right wing saying there are chips in the vaccine and whatever, you're going to die. It was, in fact, the government literally coming out and saying, if you take this, it will be 100% effective. And if you take this, you will not catch it and you will not pass it on. The exemption in this misinformation and disinformation bill is for governments. They are completely exempt from any claims of misinformation or disinformation. And this is, I hesitate, the old trope, 1984, whatever they say is true and you cannot question it. That's what really concerns me. And what I don't understand is, why isn't The Age, why isn't Crikey, why isn't The Australian, or perhaps The Australian is, but why aren't the big mainstream media outlets jumping up and down saying this bill should not pass? And I think you've got it right, is because there's financial incentives in there for them to get on board with government, and so they're limited in their ability to criticize it. What do we do about the disinformation bill? I'm so small, you're so small. I don't know how we can fight this. I'm really at a loss. I've kind of checked out, and I'm out on the farm raising animals and food at the moment.
I've noticed that. When are you coming back? When can we expect to see some new content from Discernible?
It's only been a couple of months, so it won't be much longer, and we'll be back to doing interviews, and we'll be back on it.
Great to see you, my friend, and hopefully we'll have you back on here a lot more regularly.
It's been a pleasure. See you soon.
Take care. Well, nobody has probably seen more of Andrews up close than Melbourne Radio 3AW morning host Neil Mitchell. Neil sent him off with a scathing editorial on his show Wednesday morning. Here's a minute of it.
Let's look at his record. He has bankrupted the state. The debt will reach $200 billion and will be paid for generations. He has done expensive deals for mates. He presided over a system that used public money wrongly to campaign for an election. He's found transparency to be an irritation when it should be an expectation. He has decapitated critics rather than debated them. He has run it like a dictatorship. He's intimidated colleagues and opponents. Our debt when he took over was 6% of the gross state product. It is now 4 times that. 4 times. He's kowtowed to China in ways we probably don't even know yet. He has overseen the most horrendous misuse of power and mismanagement through COVID. 801 people died. Don't forget them. Those people need not have died then. They died through hotel quarantine stuff-up that the government was responsible for, and nobody can remember what happened. He even mocked New South Wales for being too soft on COVID, but more people died here, and they got more people living in New South Wales. He has trashed the integrity system. He has spun and tricked his way through the term. He has said things that were clearly untrue or spun to the edge of reality. He did it with a straight face. He has manipulated media, intimidated or seduced media. He has launched policies with slogan no detail. He signs up for the Commonwealth Games as an election trick, then cancels it, and we're $400 million down the drain. Dan Andrews has been an insult to Victorians. In my view, we deserve better.
Brutal stuff. That's Neil Mitchell on Melbourne Radio 3AW on Wednesday morning. It was a week of glorious television, with the project really putting their big fat lefty foot in it over The Voice. The 1980s variety show singing sensation Kamahl had announced that he was going to vote yes, after originally saying he was going to vote no. Everyone was over the moon, hoping that millions of Kamahl fans would also switch their votes as the Yes campaign continued to tank to new levels in the polls. Especially our Prime Minister, who could hardly contain himself and was so excited by Kamahl's backflip that he decided to coin a new word.
Something I get great heart from is the decision of Kamahl, a very courageous decision. He's someone who came out and said no and went away, spoke to people, read what it was about, read the question and decided that he would come out and declare his support for yes, and to say why would anyone oppose this. So we have now a new term that we've coined today, Kamahlmentum, in the last couple of weeks.
Well, he was right. Kamahl had changed his mind. Only problem is he then changed it back again to no, announcing his latest change of heart live on the wokest of woke TV, Channel 10's Lefty Project show on Sunday night.
The latest Redbridge poll has the support for The Voice down a point to 38%. It also found only 15% of Aussies now listing The Voice in their top 5 priorities for the government. Cost of living, housing affordability, jobs and the economy all ranking higher. Meanwhile, Aussie icon Kamahl has declared a backflip.
Unbelievable.
After publicly backing the no vote, he met with First Nations community leaders and has now decided he'll vote yes.
I came here believing that the no was a strong possibility. They've convinced me otherwise. And I'm delighted that I have changed my no to yes.
Kamahl, it's great to see you. Where are you standing at the moment?
Well, it started with a flippant no about 10 days ago. And then a few days later, I was persuaded to believe yes would be the way to go. And when I eventually got home, 48 hours later, I had reason to believe that I might have made a mistake. In fact, I did make a mistake. And knowing as much about it as I do know now than I did before, it is definitely a yes vote. And
look at those big smiles. Could the little project people be any happier? They're just bursting with woke pride in the 89-year-old. But maybe just a bit too soon, because Kamahl hadn't finished his story.
But I don't think you really need a voice. They already have a voice.
So hang on, Kamahl, you were originally saying no, and then you went to yes. So are you back on no?
Yeah, because no is an informed decision. The first no was an uninformed decision, and then a yes was a semi-informed decision, and now 100% I am well and truly committed to saying no.
Oh no, heads are exploding all over the project set. Somebody get a mop and clean this mess up.
Hang on, so what changed your mind?
The facts. The fact is that this whole thing, if this comes to be, it becomes based on race. The Aboriginals have, or the Indigenous Torres Strait Island people already have a voice. It's a purely an opportunity of making an effort to find out what they want to say and what should be done for them. And at the moment, it's $40 billion a year.
$40 billion a year. Yep. Now, here's where it gets really good. Poor young Hamish nearly pops a blood vessel.
$40 billion a year. To the Indigenous people. Where's the money going to? What are they doing with it?
Sorry, where are you getting that figure from, Kamahl?
I beg your pardon?
Where's that figure come from?
The 40 billion?
Yeah. Where?
I saw it in, somebody told me. Maybe, I think I'm making it up.
A nice one, Hamish. Do the little befuddled face-to-camera look. Where are you getting that from, Kamahl? Where are you getting that from? And pick on your guest, your 89-year-old guest. Explain yourself, young fella.
It's just you're saying that now your decision is fully informed. I think we're all interested to understand
not
how
fully,
you've landed on this position.
No, not fully informed as I could be in 48 hours. They're spending $40 billion. How are they spending that money?
Kamahl, obviously grateful to have you on. I feel we should probably just fact check the 40 billion figure because you've used it a few times and I know a lot of people are listening to you. I think there was a claim made by Tony Abbott some years ago that the National Indigenous Australians Agency spent $30 billion a year. That's been fact checked as false. The government agency says it's never administered funding of $30 billion a year on Indigenous programs. Its total budget for 2022 and 23 was $4.5 billion. So I think it's probably just right, given that we are in a referendum and people are making up their minds, that we just get that right.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Hamish. So good of you to clear that up. You're just such a sincere, nice guy doing that for all us little dumb people. Just one tiny problem with it, mate. You are completely and absolutely wrong. Your fact check seems to be lacking in facts. Sorry. Maybe don't rely on the RMIT Fact Lab, those little people running around in white coats with truth serum in test tubes down at RMIT. The RMIT Fact Lab are so bad at fact-checking that they even got dumped by left-wing social media. Here are the actual facts for you. The 40 billion figure did not come from a claim made by Tony Abbott about the National Indigenous Australia Agency, Hamish. You condescending, patronising, badly researched. I'll stop there or I'll get sued. This is Australia, so I'm not allowed to say what I really think about Hamish and his journalism, and he's one of the better ones on that show. The $40 billion figure comes from a much more detailed report published by the Australian Government's Productivity Commission. It was the last serious, heavily and carefully researched attempt to put an actual figure on how much money is being spent on Aboriginal people in Australia. It's something so important you should know it off by heart, considering how much influence you have over the way young Australians vote, Hamish. You and the entire project team and everyone at CBS Network 10. The Productivity Commission report came out in 2017. It used figures from the 2015-2016 financial year. And it showed that total federal government spending that year was $556 billion. On Indigenous Aussies, it was $33 billion, and on non-Indigenous Australians, it was the rest, $523 billion. That's all spending for regular government services we all get and special services for Indigenous people. The $33 billion spent on Indigenous people was made up of $27 billion on the things all Aussies get and $6 billion special Indigenous programs. So is this fair? Well, we need to look at it on a per head basis, first of all. How many Indigenous people were there in 2015-2016? The Australian Bureau of Statistics put the number at 730,000 and the rest of Australia at 23.4 million people. So if you do the math, our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people got $45,000 of all federal government spending each, and the rest of us got $22,000 each. That's more than double. I repeat, more than double the amount of government spending goes to people who identify as Indigenous on average than goes to non-Indigenous Aussies on average. Now, to be fair, some of this is because of remote location living, and some of it is because of the extra special services, and some of it is because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are more in need of welfare support because of disadvantage. But the reality is, it's still more than double. It's a lot of extra care and support from Aussie taxpayers. What this means is, and I hope you're listening, MC Hammer, we are a kind nation that looks after its Indigenous people. And Aussies are clearly not systemically racist. We spend twice the amount on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people than we spend on anyone else. Okay, so that's $33 billion. Where does this $40 billion figure come from that Kamahl used that Hamish was so keen to clear up for us all? Well, this is where it gets really shocking. The Bureau of Statistics says the ATSI population is now, in 2023, around 950,000. That's a very big jump, which many have said is because more people are identifying as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. If we adjust this 33 billion number for this 30% population increase, and we adjust for inflation from 2015 to 2023, which was 28.5% in total, we have the number $55 billion. Okay, now, just before the RMIT Fact Lab people start screaming, it's not 55 billion, they've misrepresented it. Let's say maybe federal spending is down and they're not spending as much as in 2015. Even so, Kamahl's 40 billion number was very, very conservative as an estimate. So here's what needs to happen. The project, and specifically Hamish McDonald, need to make a formal apology on Sunday night to Kamahl. They also need to apologise to their viewers for wildly misinforming them. And they need to show these facts and make a correction. I'll happily rock up to South Yarra and come on the show and explain it all. I'll even pay for the flight from Brisbane to Melbourne myself. You guys have to stop misinforming people, particularly Australia's young people. It's just plain wrong. And as for the RMIT Fact Lab, well, I'll happily duck into the city and explain it to them too. But here's the really big thing I want you to take away from all this, folks. After this referendum fails, and it will if we all go out and vote, we will be told that we need misinformation and disinformation laws and more fact checkers. And this will be used to justify the introduction of the government's next horrible idea, the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill. This is just more proof that we cannot trust the establishment media and the government to tell us the truth, and we must never make them the Ministry of Truth, arbiters and gatekeepers of the truth, ever. Which brings us to this. The Libertarian Party, formerly known as the Liberal Democrats, have proposed an amendment to the Constitution of the State of New South Wales to enshrine free speech as a core principle. New South Wales MP and Libertarian Party state leader John Ruddick says the proposal shamelessly duplicates the wording of the United States First Amendment. Ruddick told ADH TV's Daisy Cousins this week that free speech was an issue that he thought had been resolved during the Cold War, that the West supported free speech and authoritarian communist states suppressed it.
Now, in every period of history where people have wanted, when powerful forces have wanted to suppress free speech, they always say, well, look, we believe in free speech, but there's always some one-off emergency which they think justifies the government suppressing people having free expression. And of course, what it's all about today is suppressing dissent on global boiling. So what we're not just proposing an amendment to the New South Wales Constitution about free speech. We're simultaneously entrenching it so it can, that clause in the Constitution could only be removed if a referendum of the people of New South Wales supported it doing so. Now, the people will never vote against free speech. The politicians will. So we're going to put it, well, let's hope the Parliament agrees to it. Now, if they don't, this is just the opening battle. We're going to keep talking about free speech until we've constitutionally entrenched it in the New South Wales Constitution.
New South Wales MLC John Ruddick from the Libertarian Party speaking with ADH's Daisy Cousins this week. Now, one place where we really should bite our tongues for a while is the time between when a person is accused of a crime and when they're convicted or found innocent of that crime. Trial by media continued in full swing this week across the English-speaking world, with Russell Brand being tried, convicted and sentenced before even getting a day in court by corporations, the UK government and even Australia's own little 60 Minutes show.
From famous funny man to loathsome creep, Russell Brand's star couldn't have fallen much further in a week. But the reason for his demise couldn't be more serious. It's claimed he's a sexual predator. Brand admits to being promiscuous, but strenuously denies wrongdoing. He says all of his sexual encounters with women have been consensual.
A likely story, Mr. Brand, a likely story. How dare you defend yourself? Don't you know how serious these allegations are? How many allegations there are? Now, I'm sick of having to say this, but I'm going to say it again, because although 99% of the people who watch this show are able to separate two simple concepts, we do have 1% of trolls and lefties who watch the show, and you really have to spell stuff out for them. I'm not defending Russell Brand. I don't know Russell Brand. I don't even particularly like Russell Brand's stuff. Although the more I see how the entire machine of global media and politics is descending upon the guy, the more sympathy I have for him. I'm talking here about a very fundamental and extremely important aspect of our system of law in the formerly free Western world called the presumption of innocence. You don't convict people based on accusations. We presume them innocent until they've had their day in court. Why? Why do we do this? Precisely because it is so easy to stitch someone up in the media and social media and by spreading rumours and lies about people. And people do it all the time in politics and public life and always have throughout history. And guess what? It doesn't matter how serious the allegations are if they turn out to be false. I could call you a murderer and a rapist, and that's a very serious allegation. But its seriousness is meaningless and irrelevant because it's not true. I could speak to 20 people who claim that you are a murderous rapist, and they could all be lying because they all have a grudge or something to gain. So the number of allegations against you is also irrelevant unless it shows a pattern of behaviour. But if not one of those allegations is true, if they're all false, then it doesn't matter if it's one creep that's falsely accusing you or an entire angry mob of tens of thousands of people that are accusing you if it's not true. So how do we know if something is true or not? Oh, we have a system for it. It's called a legal system, a court system and a criminal justice system. And this system was born out of hundreds and thousands of years of wisdom and trial and error. The one we use is called the British legal system, and it's the best in the world. It's one of the things that Australia was gifted as a nation by its founders. It's very important. It's more important than TV ratings. Someone should tell Gary McNabb, the 60 Minutes producer who put this hatchet job together.
A very brave Australian woman living in Los Angeles has now joined a growing list of Russell Brand accusers.
She's a hard-working Australian with decades of experience in the TV industry.
I just felt shame and embarrassment, and I can't believe this man did this to me.
We'll call her Rachel. In June 2008, British comedian Russell Brand came to her office. It's a day she'll never forget.
Wow, what an emotionally manipulative setup that was. In less than 10 seconds, she's a very brave woman and a hard-working woman. And she's Australian, so she's one of us, so that's great. Look, I don't know the woman. I'm sure she's all three. She's probably fantastic. But, oh, the manipulation, how they love to tell us what to think before we even know what happened. And we have that music, the same ominous music that Four Corners uses and Channel 4's Dispatches show uses. So much emotional manipulation that if you think for 1 second that this woman might not be a real victim of anything, then you are not in our little club of nice people. So what's the allegation this time?
I went for a walk back through our corridor to make my way into the bathroom, went past the studio where the door was open, where the four men were.
So Russell Brand has seen you. You've gone into the bathroom.
I've opened up a cupboard where the first aid kit is kept, along with our medicines. And when I turned around, there was a groin in front of me. What are you doing in here? Like, what are you doing, mate? And he goes, oh, you're a bit all right, aren't you? You're a bit all right. And I thought, oh, okay. And then he goes, I'm going to call you Betty. I'm going to call you Betty. And I went, but that's not my name. He said, I'm going to you. And I went, no, you're not. And he goes, yeah, I am. And I said, no, you're not. And before you know it, his penis was on his hand and he was pretty much serving it to me as he would a dish or as you'd serve someone some food.
Yuck. What a creepy guy he was. Now, this woman's accusations against Brand were true. We know that because Brand admitted it in the radio show, recounting the story a few minutes after it happened. And in the pre-Me Too era, his behaviour was considered to be so acceptable that nobody even questioned it, and you could joke about it on the radio. Now, I'm kind of glad that the Me Too era has put the spotlight on sexual harassment in the workplace and changed cultural norms a bit. And what Brand did, exposing himself to this woman in a bathroom at work, is utterly disgusting behaviour. But he wasn't her employer. He was a sleazy celebrity visiting the office where she worked, trying to hit on her in a pretty revolting and outgoing way, shall we say. This may make Russell Brand a creep, but it does not make him a rapist. And it should, under our legal system, have zero bearing on the very serious allegations of rape within consensual relationships that are being made against him now. Just a little side note. It's funny that Britain was going through a cultural decline of decency in the early part of this century, much more than Australia in a way, and it was conservatives who raised the alarm and were laughed off, as we still are today. But it's funny how this new wave of post-Me Too conservatism, which I applaud in principle, I think we should clean up our act as a society and be much more respectful of sex and sexuality as somewhat sacred and private. But these new post-Me Too Puritans, they seem only interested in curbing male heterosexuality, not any of the other kind of sexuality. Why do you reckon that is? Yeah, good old identity politics. Everything is cool and fine, so long as it's not a straight white male that's flashing their willy around. Actually, folks, it's not okay for anyone to be flashing anything around. I'd like the pride marches to clean up their act, and trannies not to sexualise kids' stories book time. And I'd like some women to go back to wearing clothes in public instead of the active wear that shares their most intimate parts with the entire world at the local shopping centre on a daily basis. But that's just me. I know many men who are happy for the show. But back to the main point. And the main point is that we have courts of law and we have to be very sceptical and careful of believing anything that the mainstream media cooks up about a guy who spends most of his time attacking the mainstream media. And, unlike me, sadly, or maybe thankfully, outperforming the mainstream media on a massive scale. Brand is their commercial competitor for eyeballs. He has millions upon millions of followers. And suddenly, wow, there's a massive pylon on the guy. What a coincidence. It was okay back in 2008 for the very same media outlets to be totally happy to put up with Brand's inappropriate behaviour and even make excuses for it. Shows like, Australia's 60 Minutes.
I'm a tricky little swine, I'm a trickster. I'm a raven, I'm a playful coyote, looking for mischief.
When you interview Russell Brand, you actually don't really know who's going to turn up.
This isn't crystal meth, that's literally a crystal. If you smoke that, all you'll get is enlightened.
The more you say don't, the more he does. That's Russell.
So it was like an alpine mountain range stabbing up into my nuts.
When I first started talking to him, I thought, oh, Russell's going to be smart-ass Russell. Then he suddenly took a shine to me, and he became most enjoyable to be around.
Is this the interview now?
This is
You're just going to lean in. That's how it indicates the commencement.
Wow. Hypocrisy sandwich, anyone? That's how it works, folks. While he's one of us, all is well. But when we decide it's time to nail the guy, the music changes from that nice, bubbly, fun stuff to the ominous Predator soundtrack from Jaws. But Russell's little flirtation with 60 Minutes' Liz Hayes didn't stop there.
He's a really smart man, and I think, in amongst it all, is a very decent man. He has a lot of humanity. He cares. So there's a whole lot packed into Russell. What is a nice English boy like you doing in a place like Hollywood?
Well, a lot of yoga, occasionally making films, making television.
But it was a place that I don't think you ever thought you would get to.
Like, do you just mean because of criminal convictions and stuff? Perhaps. And I'd like to remind you, before you go any further, on that subject, that you are Australian.
Happy Russell put me into his little golf buggy, and we were going to do some B-roll. And then Russell declared that he was going to take me on a unauthorised trip around the lot.
Yeah, and that's where things started to get a little naughty, and maybe even, one could say, fun. And maybe a Me Too person would say unacceptably unprofessional.
I want you to know I was abducted by Russell Brand. You seem to be a little naughty boy from the beginning.
You said that in a flirtatious way.
I did. What was it, do you think? I mean, there was just something rebellious inside of you, or...?
I don't trust authority. In my experience, authority figures have been unreliable. So for me, when people are saying don't do something, I sort of think, well, why? I sort of question authority figures.
You still have that?
Yes.
He understands entertainment. He's a comedian. He's an over-the-top performer. He likes to shock. That's his thing, and he does it so well. You were classified as a sex addict. I'm going to blush, but what's too much?
I can't hurt you from there, Liz.
What is too much sex?
Well, look, it's with this addiction, I think what it is any behaviour that you engage in compulsively, even though it's detrimental to your life. If when you're taking drugs or eating chocolate or having sex, it's making your life worse, and yet you cannot stop, that's addiction, and you should look at it.
How is it destructive for you?
Well, if you're sleeping with so many people that you can't get to work, or you're not being properly discerning about who the people are that you're sleeping with, people sort of, then eventually you're going to get into trouble. Just there's a numbers game, isn't it? Sooner or later it's going to be a married person, or you're going to pick up something unforgivable and unrelenting. But I've been very, very lucky.
Seasoned as I am as a journalist, I am prepared for all events and all kinds of people. And when Russell Brand decided he would like to kiss me, well, you size up the situation. You think, am I in danger? What's going to go here? What could go wrong?
Liz, that's your fault. Because you took your eye off the road because things was getting a bit fruity out there. All right, Liz, goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's been really a wonderful experience.
The naughty Russell ended the day. Do I have to tell you?
See you later, Liz.
Russell.
All right, take care. Russell, I can undo your bra just like this. Liz, I love you.
No, Russell's a performer. So in my opinion, Russell, there are many Russells, and I think the at-home Russell is probably exhausted. I reckon Russell's put so much energy into shocking me that he's now had to go home and have a lie down with a cup of tea and put some meditation music on and do some yoga because he puts a lot of energy into shocking people.
I'm so confused. I mean, we love it when he's being the larrikin and shocking people. We pay to see it. We're happy to play along and promote it. But when he goes too far, then we want to destroy him. Okay, nice. Do you see the problem here, folks? The problem lies in this. Who gets to decide what is too far and what isn't? The alleged victim decides, and the hypersexualised male, in this case, has to guess. And that's fine, I guess. That's the dance of flirtation. But it's bloody confusing for young boys. So I'm going to take a minute and play dad to our young boys, if you'll just excuse me, because I think that our young men are being let down big time by our modern, sick culture of gross hypocrisy, Channel 9 style. They get all these totally contradictory messages shoved down their throats as their brains are developing, and they get very little good advice from our culture on what's right and what's not. So boys, this is for you. We live in a hypersexualised culture where everyone and everything is allowed to be hypersexual except you. That's just the way it is right now. It is not okay to use that injustice as an excuse to overstep the mark with women. You have to rise above it. You have to be brave and strong and chivalrous beyond what anybody should be expected to be. In the face of girls walking around wearing practically nothing, using all of their massive sexual power over you, you must resist. You must remain good and noble and do what is right. We're put on this earth to protect mother and child. That's part of what being a good man is all about. But we're asking you to do something that's never really been asked of any men in history. We're asking your generation to uphold that righteousness in the face of a culture of the most unbridled female sexual self-expression in history, in the face of endless pornography at the press of a button, in the face of OnlyFans and TikTok and corporate advertising using sex to manipulate your natural sexual desire for women at every turn. And yet you must still behave yourselves and control yourselves. There's just zero excuse for doing otherwise, I'm afraid. But we need to applaud you for that and let you know that we are expecting something very big of you. And we have let you down in our culture. And we're sorry. Things will hopefully balance out again soon. Seek out the good women of character and substance and good values. Seek out good relationships. Treat these women like queens, for they too are fighting against awful cultural norms. These women will reward you and bring you more happiness than any plastic-breasted, plastic-lipped, over-Botoxed, vacuous narcissist on social media will ever do. And there are many, many good women out there. Good luck. I'm so glad I'm over the hill and happily married and not in my 20s in the 2020s. That's all we have time for the show tonight, folks. But just to underscore that point of the danger and the risk here related to having government people, having politicians acting as some kind of ministry of truth. In case you missed it, I'll read from the London Express newspaper. A UK Parliament committee has written to social media platforms asking them if they intend to prevent Russell Brand from earning any money via his platforms. So talk about not respecting the presumption of innocence. It was the chair of Parliament's Culture, Media and Sport Committee, a woman by the name of Dame Caroline Dinenage, DBE. She wrote to several social media platforms asking them to confirm whether Brand could still monetize his work on those platforms. And she went on to ask whether they intend to join YouTube in suspending Mr. Brand's ability to earn money on the platform. I think it's appalling that YouTube has done that. She sent the letter to Rumble and TikTok. Rumble responded by sharing the letter on X, formerly Twitter, and said it was, quote, deeply inappropriate and dangerous that the UK Parliament would attempt to control who's allowed to speak on our platform or earn a living from doing so. It went on to say that although it may be politically and socially easier for Rumble to join a cancel culture mob, doing so would be a violation of our company's values and mission. We emphatically reject the UK Parliament's demands. So I'd like to say that I applaud Rumble 110%. I think we should all get onto Rumble as much as we can and avoid YouTube as much as we possibly can. That'll probably cost us a little bit of an algorithm advantage there, I'm sure. But hey, you know, the time has come. There's no appeasing these social media monsters that want to censor and want to demonetize any sort of opinion that they disagree with. We must fight back. So please support the platforms that are independent, like ADH TV. Do join up, do sign up. We'd love to have you. If you want to remain anonymous, you don't have to sign up. You won't be able to comment on our pages and stuff, but we'd love to have you sign up. But you can watch the shows adh.tv on any browser. So please join us and please support us as we continue the fight to keep media free, to keep a diversity of opinions in the Australian media being available to you, and also, and most importantly, to make sure that we fight the misinformation and disinformation proposed laws that are coming, our next big battle after The Voice. We'll see you next week for our special show on The Voice. We'll be having an interesting panel discussion and going into a little bit more detail than usual on it for you. So join us next Friday for that. Until then, you have a great week and we'll catch you then. Bye.